Welcome to the DIY Detail Podcast. Today I have an extremely special guest. His name is Lake Speed. You know him better as the Motor Oil Geek, but Lake needs no introduction as far as I'm concerned. And if you don't know him, his link to his channel will be down below. You need to subscribe whether you own a car, drive a car, think of having a car, or anything to do with cars. But Lake is primarily involved in racing and all aspects of motor oil and everything to do with motor oil. He is one of the world's leading tribologists. And if you don't know what a tribologist is, Lake can introduce it or can tell us what that is.
Yeah, it's a study of friction, wear, and lubrication. So engines are fantastic because they actually experience all three stages of lubrication: boundary, mixed, and hydrodynamic in every single engine cycle. So as a tribologist, you got to love engines, which means you got to be the motor oil geek.
Excellent. And how long have you been doing this, Lake?
20 years. Yeah, it's a funny story. I didn't wake up one day when I was a teenager and say, you know what, I want to be a tribologist. That was never on my radar. I couldn't even spell that back then anyway. But I did work in NASCAR. My dad was a race car driver, drove in NASCAR, owned a NASCAR team. And so I've been around that my life, pretty much my whole life. And then I went to work for Joe Gibbs Racing in October of 2004. And when I did that, they brought me on board to be part of this oil program. And, I knew the big teams in NASCAR because, Dad was always independent, smaller single car team type guy, not a big multi-car team with, big name sponsors like FedEx and Home Depot and Interstate Batteries, I was like, man, this is how the other half lives. Like they have their own oil made for them. How crazy is that? But what we learned was that there's all these different brands. Like, everyone has their different favorite brand of oil and things like that. Well, there's only 4 companies that actually make the additives, the chemicals that go in to the base oil to make the motor oil. Lubrizol, Afton, Ornite, and Chevron Phillips. Almost no one has ever heard of any of these companies. They know the brands, but they don't know the people that actually make the stuff that goes into the products. It reminds me of those old BASF commercials. We don't make the products you buy, we make them better. Right. BASF actually is what they call it an intermediary supplier. So like literally Afton, Ornite, Infinium, all those guys, they buy some components from BASF and they combine them all together with other things they make themselves, other things they buy. They actually make the additive packages, the zinc, the moly, the detergent, the dispersants, the antifoam, all the different additives that actually make the oil good, that improve the performance of the product beyond just what the base oil itself could do. So those companies do. And we were fortunate at Joe Gibbs Racing to be working with Lubrizol, who was one of those 4. And working with those guys was mind-blowing because now this whole other world opened up where you got to kind of peek behind the curtain and not be on the marketed to side anymore and actually see what actually happens in the production and the testing and the development. And, one of the things that I learned really quickly that the default position of most automotive enthusiasts is wrong. And what I mean by that is that default position is, well, I need to probably add a little bit of something to it. And if a little bit is good, a little more is going to be better. That's like absolutely wrong. It's like, if that's your first instinct, it's like, do the opposite of what your instinct is. Because what we learned at Joe Gibbs Racing is more isn't better. Less is better. In fact, a recent video I did that I think is causing some people some consternation is I'm like, you don't need a high zinc motor oil anymore. Now, there was a time when that was necessary.
Right.
But things have changed. And what changed is the level of detergent in the oil. So prior to we'll call it the advent of turbocharged direct injection engines, which are pretty common these days. They were basically more and more detergent was being put in the oil. So you needed, for a performance engine, a flat tappet type engine, you needed to have a higher level of ZDP to maintain the balance of, if they're increasing detergent, you better increase ZDP with it. Otherwise, you're going to get an out of balance situation, which is going to lead to increased wear, engine failure. Ask me how I know. We live this.
Yeah.
But what's happened is that with turbocharged direct injection engines, it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that that high level of detergent actually caused abnormal combustion in the engine. And we could go off for an hour discussion on that, which we won't go into that detail. Just
you've got
me.
a lot of videos on your channel about that, so that's good.
Yeah. So lowering the detergent level provides better protection for low speed pre-ignition, protect these engines. And in lowering that, but not changing the amount of zinc, the balance has shifted back so that with less additive in the oil, we actually see better wear protection, even for older engines, without having more ZDP. So things have changed a lot. Just
they're getting better.
Things are getting better. I think it's a fair statement that for quite some time, things were getting worse for the performance enthusiast or the classic car owner, which why there were so many products that were generated specifically to meet the needs of that crowd. But with API SP and now API SQ, the latest oil specs, that's changed things. And so now the things are getting better and heading back in the direction that's better for everybody. Now, if you have a race car and you've got, high valve spring pressures, aftermarket camshaft, aggressive valve train, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to people with stock engines, stock valve train. Race guys, you still need race oil. It's a different question. But I think that's the thing is that there's a lot that has changed even in the last 3 or 4 years that most people don't know. People are still using 10-year-old knowledge and thinking that it's current, and it's not.
No. I see a lot of people talking about, I put on my older truck diesel oil and it's a gas powered truck, and I've seen all your videos on that, and I know it's not a good idea. So if you're still doing that, don't do that. It's not designed to be in your engine. Now, I've got some questions from our viewers, and we have a really active Facebook page. And this morning I posted, do you have any questions for Lake? And we've got like 50 replies so far. Some of them repeat themselves. So, but one of them, storing your car for the winter. And I know we're, almost in summer now. We're a couple days away from summer, but storing your car in winter, what does that do to the oil? Should you change the oil right before storing it? Should you wait till you get it out in the spring, hot and cold cycles, etc.?
So great question. Change your oil before you put the car in storage, and then don't touch it. Put it on the battery tender. Don't go out there and crank it. It's just fine. Leave it alone.
Yep.
When spring comes, just go drive it. The oil is not going to go bad sitting in your engine without it running. And here's why. Motor oil is going to do exactly what it's designed to do, just protect your engine, unless it's acted on by two things: contamination and temperature. Now, during winter storage, it's not getting hot, so it's not going to oxidize the oil and make it break down. And as long as you don't start the engine, if you just leave it alone, leave it in the garage, it's going to be fine. It's really no different than leaving it in the bottle. So you can go drive it all spring into the summer, however long it takes to get your normal oil change, then change it then. But just make sure that when you put the car away again in the fall or early winter, just change the oil at that time.
Okay, excellent. The advent of today's gasolines that have ethanol and all sorts of different things in them, what is that, or how does it affect the oil, if it affects the oil in any way?
Well, E85 affects the oil, right? Because you have E85, you have to run a richer air fuel ratio. So you're going to be putting more fuel into the engine, which changes what's called the oil to fuel ratio. And like we were just saying, fuel is the enemy of your oil. It's the number one contaminant. So, and with ethanol, because it's a very polar molecule, it actually competes against some of the anti-wear additives and stuff in there. So it basically inhibits the function of the oil. So usually if you run, say, E85 or a high ethanol blend, I'm not talking about E10. I'm talking about probably E20, E30 and higher.
Okay.
Then you need to shorten your oil change interval accordingly. Usually if you go to E85, you should probably cut your oil change interval in half because you're going to be about doubling the amount of fuel you're putting through the oil.
Oh, excellent. Now, another question, and it ties in, and they just happen to be in line here. Uh, Oil change intervals from the manufacturers. My perception is they're telling us, 10,000, 12,000 miles just because they want to reduce the cost of ownership or the perceived cost of ownership. Is that true? And should we ignore that and just change it every 3,000 miles like we've always done?
Well, they do get benefit from, like you said, cost of ownership, some cafe credits, of recommending a longer drain interval. With that being said, as a used oil analyst that sees the real data, most people will change their oil too soon. But within the subset population of the people who are willing to spend money to have their oil analyzed. So understand that's not the broadest community out there. The people that really care about their cars are the people who are probably going to go spend the extra time and money to have their oil analyzed to see what's going on with it. So that's a different person, different consumer than average. But again, with that being said, more times than not, they're changing the oil too soon.
Okay.
It's very possible, depending upon the driving condition. And that's really the thing, right? The problem is we're asking the wrong question. We're posing this as, oh, when should I change my oil? Or like, are these recommendations, bad for my engine because they're trying to make my engine fail so they can sell me another car?
Right.
Well, no. I mean, they're not recommending something that's going to cause catastrophic failure to happen because that's going to end up backfiring on them. But I can also say that I've seen cars go the recommended oil change interval and it's just fine because they live in a moderate climate. They have a 30-mile commute to work each day, mostly, highway or interstate. When you have those kind of conditions, you're going to get a longer oil life. I've also seen oils that are dead in 3,000 or 4,000 miles because they're in a pretty cold environment, really short trip driving, no highway, stop and go traffic, like Chicago. I mean, Chicago, you're going to get a shorter oil life than if you're in Tempe, Arizona.
Okay.
Now that may be counterintuitive. Somebody say, "Well, Tempe's hot." Yeah, heat's your friend, right? You need the oil to get up to 220 degrees Fahrenheit so you can boil the water because water is a byproduct of combustion. You need to
Right.
boil the water out of the oil. You need to evaporate the fuel that's blow by is getting past the rings out of the crankcase. If you can do those two things, you extend the oil life. Now, if you get the oil, 300 degrees Fahrenheit, that's different. That's going to shorten the oil's life.
Yeah.
But if you can keep it in that sweet spot, kind of Goldilocks and Three Bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right, you can get a longer oil life. So the real question is not what should my oil change interval be? It's where do you live? How do you drive? Based on that, there will be a proper oil change interval, and it might be 3,000 miles or it might be 10,000 miles, but you're going to need the data to tell you which one it actually is.
Excellent. So that data brings me to your company, Speed Diagnostics. at Speed Diagnostics, you do oil analysis. Now,
Mhm.
you're a very small, specialized lab. There are really big labs out there as well. And
Yeah.
personally, I have my oil analyzed at every, before every oil change. It's just something I've done for decades. And to me, I consider it a very important part of car ownership, especially if you want to keep the car a long time, and not just getting one oil analysis done, but you need a comparison. So
Right.
your first oil analysis is just giving you a baseline. Your second oil analysis is the one that's actually telling you what's happening. As far as my knowledge of it, is that true? And for the average consumer, is an oil analysis a good thing to do?
Yeah, you got the picture exactly right. The way I look at it is each sample is like a pixel in a picture. If you have one sample, you have one pixel. I mean, it gives you something, but it doesn't tell you the full picture. Over time, the more samples you take, that trend analysis is extremely powerful because now it's like having a tailored suit that fits you. You know what's normal for your engine, where you drive, how you drive. Then you can see any deviations from that and then take corrective action to prevent the catastrophic failure that's really costly, really inconvenient. You can get ahead of it and make big things. So, yes, you've got it right. And good on you for having the right mentality and discipline to be doing it for a long time because that's where you get the most benefit. And then to answer the question about, well, should you be doing it? I spoke at a conference last week with oil industry people. So it's people that run nuclear power plants, wastewater treatment plants. I mean, these are people that keep our world going behind the
Yes.
scenes. Oil analysis is like them breathing in and breathing out. They do oil analysis on every gearbox, every piece of lubricated equipment in their plants because that's just how you maintain reliability. And we all want things like nuclear power and water and things like that to have reliability. And I did a little quiz. So, all right, who in here uses oil analysis in your daily job? Well, everybody raise their hand, right?
Yeah.
I said, well, how many of you use it in your daily drivers? Like maybe 10% of the crowd,
Yeah.
and we had some fun with that. But where I was going with this is that it's pretty easy with today's modern cars, say like a GM car or truck, where it has the oil life indicator, which is uses an algorithm based on things like throttle position, temperature, where it can predict conservatively how
Yeah.
often you should change your oil.
Hmm.
But the problem with that system is it does not account for two things: oil consumption, run you out of oil, or fuel dilution. So if you get dirty injectors because the fuel you're using, doesn't have only has the LAC, the lowest additive concentration detergent package, and you
Hmm.
start building up fuel dilution, that's going to lower the viscosity, that's going to increase wear, and it doesn't see that. So that's where used oil analysis, even if you're only doing it, once a year,
Yeah.
at least you get a visual insight into what's happening in your engine beyond just, well, I'm just trusting what the OEM said. I have some data. I can make data driven decisions based on what is the best oil change run for me. Should I be using a fuel additive? How often do I need to use the fuel additive to keep my injectors clean? It lets you cost optimize because oil changes aren't cheap, right? The $20 Jiffy Lube oil change is gone.
Yeah.
Um, Fuel additives aren't cheap anymore. So the reality is the cost of the car, the cost of upkeep can be pretty expensive. An investment, in oil analysis can pay for itself pretty easily just by optimizing all your other maintenance procedures because you're doing it based on data, not what someone said on the internet, which is
Right.
rarely good advice.
Yeah.
Did I say
That
that? Yeah,
that we know.
yeah. Yeah.
Now, speaking of good advice, internet, how is AI affecting tribology, or is it?
I've looked at some of the things. Right, people have sent me some things. So oddly enough, we were doing a webinar for a group the other day. We were talking about something about oil viscosity, and they had asked Grok something, and Grok quoted me. So I said, okay, well, the end of the world is near. But I mean, it gets some things right, some things it's still off a little bit. So I mean, I guess that's probably the case for everything
Yeah.
AI. That
It
it's
goes off common knowledge, and
right.
common knowledge isn't always good knowledge. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, I wouldn't trust it blindly. I'll put it that way. Is it
yeah,
helpful? Yes. Take it as gospel? No.
no, never. Uh, does a clean car really consume less fuel than a dirty car? We're talking detailers.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're in these, which gives you the best horsepower? A clean car, pinstripes, or stickers?
Stickers.
Stickers? Okay.
Stickers. Oh yeah.
Very good.
When you put on the Edelbrock sticker, you instantly gain 10 horsepower.
Yeah. Well, the hooker header one was pretty good too.
That was a
I
good one. The thrust, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Those were good.
STP. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So, STP, engine oil additives. Yes or no?
That'd be a big no.
Big no.
Big
Fuel
no.
additives.
Fuel additives are good, especially for the ones that contain polyetheramine. So
Okay.
PEA, polyetheramine, is a type of detergent additive that can clean things like injectors, carburetors, combustion chamber deposits. It because regular fuel, and when I mean by regular fuel, I mean not top tier, and top tier is a fuel spec, not an octane rating or a brand.
Yeah.
So it can be kind of confusing. Um, Regular fuel of whatever octane has what's called the lowest additive concentration, which is the EPA minimum detergent level. But many OEMs, Honda, BMW, many others, have all determined that that level of detergency is really too low for their engines. That to get the proper performance and longevity out of your engines, you should be using a top tier fuel. So there's a
Okay.
website. It's called toptierfuel.com or .org. I forget. You can look it up. Top tier
Yeah.
fuel. And it will tell you in your area which stations are top tier, which ones are not. That way you can know, and that way you're not having to rely on there being a sticker on the pump that says top tier, because just because it has a sticker, or just because it doesn't have a sticker doesn't mean it's not, right?
Yeah.
And all the different octane grades are going to have the top tier additive package in it. And that keeps things like injectors clean. Well, that technology is also in fuel detergents. So something like Chevron Techron Complete, or like say Gum Out All in One, there are several different ones. If it contains polyetheramine, then it will have that same function. And if you start getting dirty injectors, it is a one tank, one shot, clean it up and get you back on the right path. Because as we mentioned earlier, fuel is the enemy of your oil. You don't want excess fuel dilution. Clean injectors make a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Synthetic oils versus standard oils. Good, bad, necessary, not necessary.
I mean, synthetic oils just work better. I mean, they run cooler, they last longer. I mean, there's a few, we'll call them odd situations. I'll say odd, like let's say I have a 1948 Oldsmobile that has rope seals in it. Well,
Yeah.
a 2050 mineral based oil is going to do a better job not leaking
Hmm.
than a 10W30 synthetic will.
Yeah. Okay. And when we say mineral oil and synthetic oil,
Mhm.
what makes it synthetic? Because they're still using dead dinosaurs as the base of it. But why is it called synthetic?
So, what we can consider a conventional oil is processed crude oil. So
Okay.
obviously there's different sources of crude, and crude around the world is not all the same. And not
Mhm.
every crude can produce lubricating oil.
Okay.
And so depending upon what crude that is, when you refine that crude down, you can extract out something that can be used as lube oil, and that's what we consider conventional oil. There's a couple of different ways of processing it that will yield that lube oil, and those are called Group 1, Group 2, and those are mineral oils, conventional oils.
Yeah.
If you severely refine, they call it hydrocrack. So you're taking that lube oil or that crude, but now we're cracking the molecules. We're taking these long molecules and we're breaking them down into smaller molecules. Basically, we're sectioning out the parts we want.
Okay.
You know, so like we're taking this big thing. Well, this big structure's got a bunch of different things we don't want, but this little piece in here we like. So we're going to chop this thing down to only the pieces we like. That process makes it synthetic because we've now changed the molecular structure. It's still a hydrocarbon,
Right.
but we're changing the structure. So that's one path. There's two other paths that take either natural gas or other, larger gaseous molecules, and then we build them up. So the hydrocracking, which is typically called a Group 3 process for the people who really like to nerd out on this stuff, that's breaking down a large hydrocarbon, let's say liquid. The PAO and GTL, those two processes are building up a liquid from what was a gas.
Okay.
Now, when you use natural gas, the smallest one, and turn it into a liquid, that's called a GTL. That is technically a Group 3. So it still falls in the same category as the crude that's broken down, break down the molecules. So those are the, Group 3, Group 4, or your two synthetic categories. Group 5 is this other category that exists. It's the catch-all. It's everything that's not in Groups 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just because it's a Group 5 doesn't mean it's synthetic. There are some synthetics in there, and there's also things like vegetable oil. Like canola oil is Group 5, and you don't want to put that in your engine.
No. Now, speaking of your engine, though, what oil does Lake like to use? Just the two of us here, so you don't have to worry about it.
No one's watching, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've shown this, and I've just recently did an oil change in my Porsche Boxster, and I had been using the Pennzoil Ultra Platinum, and I had wanted to compare that to the previous oil, which was the Driven DI 30, which is a product I had formulated when I was at Joe Gibbs, which is kind of my reference. So like, okay, how good is this Pennzoil Ultra Platinum? Because it looks like it's pretty interesting technology. It's that GTL, and they had adopted a less is more type formulating strategy, which I'm a big fan of. So it actually worked out really good. Right? So I'm letting the cat out of the bag. I haven't made that video yet to show the results, but the results were, every bit as good, if not actually a little bit better than the Driven products. That speaks highly to me.
Yeah.
So it's after, spending a year, several oil changes, testing that product out, I've now put in my own formula. I made up something just to see what would happen. There's some newer technology out there, and I was like, you know what? Let's just see. Let's see how this new technology stacks up. Now we have a really good baseline on a high quality mass market synthetic. Let's see how the two compare.
Now, mass market synthetics, you have your Walmart oils, you have your garage, your corner store oils or gas station oils, and then you have your specialty oils. Is there really that big of a difference? I know there's a big difference in terms of the additive packages and all that, but over the lifetime of your vehicle, is it worth spending more on a more expensive oil?
It really depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're just looking for an oil that meets the spec, the OEM spec, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a Exos 1 Gen 3 020. Pretty much they're all going to do pretty good, from as long as it has the actual Dexos label on it, that it
Yeah.
meets all the requirements. It's fully licensed. Whether you buy that at Walmart or you buy it from, you know, Germany,
Yeah.
both of them are going to do pretty much the same thing. Now, back to where you live, how you drive, one may do better than the other, but you're not going to know that unless you're testing.
Okay.
But the reality is they'll both get the job done. They're not going to leave you broken down the side of the road. One's not, 100 times better than the other one. They're all going to be pretty close to each other in performance.
Good. Uh, Now when we're looking at all these different characteristics of oils, you mentioned new technology. What do we have to look forward to in oils?
Well, that's the neat thing, is that back to the zinc issue that came up years and years ago, the great thing that came out of that was having a limit on the amount of zinc made the Lubrizols, the Aftins, the Oronites, and Infiniums of the world work harder at finding components you could put in the oil that don't contain phosphorus, because it's really phosphorus, not the zinc, that matters, so that you could increase the protection of the engine without doing anything negative to the catalytic converter or emissions equipment. And they've been able to do that. So there are other technologies such as molybdenum, MODTC, that's come in that works synergistically with the ZDP and gives you a better response. So that's the neat thing, in that there's even newer technology that's coming down the line that gives even better fuel economy. So better horsepower, wherever you want to look at it, right? If you're the racer, fuel economy equals horsepower.
Yeah.
If you're the person that just likes to buy less gas, well, then what gives you more horsepower also gives you more fuel economy. So there's just some newer technologies that are enabling the OEMs to be able to get better fuel economy just by changing the oil formulation. If you can gain, 1% or 0.5%, that's a
Yeah.
big deal.
It is. Yeah, especially for myself. So my quote unquote daily driver is my house. It's a 12.7 liter Detroit Series 60 engine that's pushing a tour bus around.
Yeah,
So, 1 or 2% when you're talking 6 miles per gallon really does make a difference.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Now, one additional question related to that: what's the impact of oil consumption on catalytic converters, O2 sensors, things like that? So if you
So
are getting a bit of blow by, how bad is it?
right, so that's what really is the key. As long as the oil stays in the crankcase, the catalytic converter doesn't know how much zinc is in your oil
Okay.
and doesn't really care. But when you have higher levels of oil consumption, now it knows, and it feels it and it sees it. So higher levels of oil consumption will lead to premature death of all of your emissions equipment.
Okay. Now I know you do a lot of work with piston rings as well. And are engine flushes a good idea? And if so, how often should they be done?
I'm not a fan of putting anything in your oil that your oil manufacturer didn't already put in there,
Okay.
because you run the risk of a negative mixture. Not all chemistries are made the same. Not all chemistries get along. So
Yeah.
different detergent types will hate each other. They may be fine alone, but they're not okay mixed. So without knowing that chemistry of what's in that flush, it's impossible to know how that flush is going to work in your engine. Now, I know the idea is you don't run it for very long and all this. Okay, listen, in today's world, we have a thing called Valvoline Restore and Protect. If you're really worried about your engine being dirty, Just put Valvoline Restore and Protect in it. It's going to clean it up. It's
Okay.
proven to do it. And you don't have to go play chemist in the backyard. As long as you kind of stay on top of your oil change intervals, you're not going to have that big buildup. But
Okay.
if you are concerned about it, new car that you purchased used and you don't know what the service history is,
Yeah.
I would choose the Restore and Protect over an engine flush every single time.
Okay. So Valvoline makes an oil called Restore and Protect.
Yes.
Okay, good. We make a plastic Restore and Protect. So uh, similar name and does same idea. So the oil additives, not a good idea. The Restore and Protect is. Now, if your oil company of choice
Mhm.
makes a oil or a flush that is compatible with their oils, is that an okay thing for someone
I
that
don't
absolutely
hate
wants to clean the inside of their engine?
I don't hate that, right? Because
Okay.
you're making the assumption, and it's probably a fair assumption, that if your favorite brand of oil happens to also sell an engine flush, they've at least tested the engine flush to be compatible with their oil. That's a logical uh, statement. So I don't hate that.
Hmm.
I don't believe it will be as effective as a product like the Restore and Protect. And again, I'm not trying to be a Valvoline fanboy here. It's just
Yeah.
that product is really unique. Like, it's really cool chemistry that took those guys a long time and a lot of work to find that right balance of additives and chemistry to break down the carbon deposits in the ring. So again, back to my experience as a piston ring guy, I know that oil ring tension is usually one of the big reasons for oil consumption. If the bore finish isn't wiped out and gone, the other thing that matters when it comes to oil consumption is ring tension. And usually it's deposits that inhibit the rings. And you're already running a low oil ring tension for fuel economy. That's what the OEMs are giving you. If you build up deposits in that ring groove, it's going to make them stick. And then you have less oil control, which means you're going to have more oil consumption. If you clean out those deposits in the ring groove, that is going to restore oil ring performance, which is going to lower oil consumption. So that product is scientifically proven to do that. Everything else is a marketing claim. And I hate oil marketing.
Yeah.
I just don't, there's claims,
Hmm.
there's no proof. Where
Right.
I've held the pistons that were cleaned up before and after. I've seen it. I'm choosing what I know I put my hands on versus
Right.
what someone's promising me magic beans are going to do. I just don't believe in magic beans.
Yeah. Good. Speaking of magic beans, bypass filtration systems. Good, bad?
In diesels, they work great if you're trying to extend your oil drain interval. That's the benefit of them. The bypass oil filtration systems are common in large industrial systems, especially when they have precision hydraulics, because you have to have a very high level of cleanliness when you have precision hydraulics.
Right.
So they work
Okay.
great for that because they keep the particle count low and they improve cleanliness. They're fantastic for that.
Good.
Automotive engines, they have hydraulics. They're not
Yeah.
precision hydraulics.
No.
They're very tolerant of all the junk because engine oil is literally 100 times dirtier than hydraulic fluid. That sounds crazy, but it's true.
Yeah.
Um, just to give you a little number, so hydraulic fluid on they call the particle count, their cleanliness code needs to be below 12. That's the rating number.
12 ppm or
It's just the rating number.
okay,
The
it's a
rating
rating.
system. So at 0, there's no particles, nothing larger than 4 micron in the oil. every time you every time that number goes up, it means the number of particles doubled. So hydraulic fluid in an industrial application needs to be no more than 12.
Okay.
It's common to see hydraulic fluid or engine oil 18, 19, 20. So
Out of
from 12
the
to
can.
13, it doubled.
Yeah.
Just in the engine.
Yeah.
Out of the can, probably 15 or 16 is
Okay.
pretty normal. So from 12 to 13, it doubled. It doubled again from 13 to 14, doubled yet again, 14 to 15. You follow where I'm going. It's
Yeah.
insanely more dirty in that application. So if you're trying to go long drain intervals, a bypass filter on your diesel will keep the soot level down, which will enable you to go longer on the oil drain intervals. It does not mean your oil can last forever because the
No.
additive package will be consumed. The base oil will eventually break down, but you're not making it where contamination is the determining factor for the life of the oil. More than likely, it's going to be additive depletion or base oil oxidation. You're just changing what metric is going to normally be the condemning factor of the oil. Not a bad idea, but you just got to know up front that it's kind of a waste if you're going to go buy a bypass filter and change your oil every 3,000 miles. You're just wasting your money and wasting time.
Yeah. No, I've got a bypass filtration system on the bus. Uh, you know, my oil change interval went from 10,000 miles. Now it's, I do it roughly around every 50 or 60,000. I get a oil analysis every 10,000 miles just to check it.
Yep.
When I do that, I replace the cartridge filters or the standard filters, which means I'm replacing 1 gallon of the 10 gallons of oil that are in the sump anyways at that time.
Yep.
Yeah. So adding a bit of, the additive package back. So far, basically, I'm the one that quit on the oil instead of the oil quitting on me. It's just at 50,000 miles, like, no, I've saved enough. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll put new oil in. We're good with that. But because the bypass filtration system was $300, and my sump takes a little over 11 gallons of oil, so just 2 oil changes, it's paid for itself.
Absolutely, yeah. Even if you only tripled your oil life, you paid for it pretty quickly by doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Any wisdom you would like to impart on our listeners that we have covered in questions that you feel is a topic that really needs to be discussed?
Wow. I mean, these have been great questions. This is like the 101 of what everyone needs to know, pretty much. I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit, the current API, SP, the new SQ spec coming out is an improvement. Things have gotten better. Filtration is really important, like you just mentioned. One of the key things about filters that a lot of people don't know is that oil filters and air filters get better as they age. Now they reach a point where they clog up, but changing things more often, while it seems like a good idea in practice, in reality, the more often you touch something, the more probability of a maintenance-induced failure. Every time you do something, you increase the risk of that. And both the U.S. Navy, the Department of Energy have done studies and said if you only go on time-based maintenance, you will have more failures than if you go on a predictive maintenance model, where you allow the data, used oil analysis, vibration analysis, other things, to tell you when. And when you couple in some guardrails, kind of like what you're doing, like I'm doing oil analysis to find out where I am, but I'm not going to go more than 50,000 miles, even if it says I can.
Yeah.
Right? You're setting some guardrails that aren't narrow. You can set a little bit wider guardrail because you have the data to support that. But then you're going to basically make sure you have those checks and balances. That's the right mentality for the people that really care. Because there's a lot of people that really care about this stuff, which is awesome. And I love that we've had this community that we can connect, on YouTube and on the different social media platforms is fantastic to be able to do that. But what I feel is missing is that understanding that it's not an either or, it's both and.
Okay.
That don't just change your oil based on time or based on mileage. Don't just default to, well, whatever the indicator or the oil analysis says. Use all of the tools, put it all together, build a system based on where you live, how you drive, what you're doing, make good data-based decisions, and you're going to end up in a better place. And like your example, in the end, all of that will pay for itself.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Cool. Yeah, my bus, I've only got 1.6 million miles on it. It's never
It's
been opened up.
1.6.
Yeah, it hasn't been opened up yet. My last bus I sold, I rebuilt the engine at 3.1 million miles and then sold it at 3.2. So they'll be good for a couple years after that. That engine had been rebuilt before, but this particular engine hasn't been opened yet. So we hope to keep it that way. And that's where the oil analysis is fun because you can really see what's going on with the engine. Us older people, we looked at oil pressure, we looked at oil temperature, we looked at all that stuff. But before the advent of oil analysis, there was no other real metric. But now with oil analysis, we can really, geek out,
Yeah,
as your title says, but at the same time, really know what's going on and why it's happening. If you see
absolutely.
a higher level of tin, it's like, oh, time to replace the bearings, et cetera, et cetera. So cool.
No, that's great because that's a great real world example of how someone has embraced that technology, applied it consistently over time, and look at your results. I mean, that's fantastic. But that's what it can do, right? That's the difference between nuclear power plants running 24/7 for decades, not
Yeah.
having problems using it versus not.
Right. So ATF in the gas tank, never a good idea. ATF in the oil. Yeah.
Yeah, don't
Uh,
do that.
yeah, all these old wives' tales, they should stay as old wives' tales. And back in the day, we used to do this, but today we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
One final question that just popped up: the a modern engine oil, like an SP or an SQ.
Mhm.
Let's say we're driving in 1980.
Mhm.
That back in the day, I think it was SH, SG, something like that.
Yeah.
Was the spec just putting the modern oil in do a bad thing now that we're back to an oil that's got a good balance between zinc and detergents?
SP oil will be way better than an SH oil ever would be.
Okay, good.
It would provide better wear protection and way better engine cleanliness, massively better engine cleanliness than an SH oil would have.
And my car calls for a 0W8. Am I better
Yeah.
off putting in a 10W30?
No,
No, okay.
no. To be able to run lower viscosity oils, typically the bearing clearances are a little bit tighter. And the biggest thing is it's not so much the difference between the 8 and the 30. It's going from a 0W to a 10W, depending upon where you live,
Yeah,
because now you're really changing how thick the oil really is in the engine. Now, going from a 0.8 to a 0.16, no biggie. And
yeah,
the reality is, if you have a car, Toyotas, that call for 0W8, that's something you can do. You can experiment and see, right? The oil analysis will let you know. Get it broken in. It's
yep,
going to take a little while. Take probably 3 or 4 oil changes to get all the break-in debris out and get a good baseline established. Then, based on that, then you can say, okay, let's try 0.16 and let's see what the wear looks like. See what your fuel economy looks like.
yeah,
Then maybe try 0.20. Stay in the same brand. Don't change brands. When you change brands, you throw the chemistry, everything goes goofy. But
right,
from, say, you're running a Toyota, you could use the Toyota brand or Mobile One, whichever you want to do. But pick one, stick with it, and then change from 0.8 to 0.16 to 0.20, and then go back from 20 to 16 to 8, and just see what the oil analysis tells you. Do wear metals go up or down? If you see your aluminum spiking up, that shows that that oil is too thick, that the piston to wall clearance is pretty tight on that engine, because they know that viscosity of oil, and you're putting in something too thick, and now you're getting in a little bit more piston wear because you put in too thick of an oil. That's just one little way of kind of reading it. But it's better to make those decisions based on data,
Yep.
than what someone told you in an internet forum.
Now, with a hybrid, this is something that, to me, you triggered something in your response there. Hybrids, the engine, one of my vehicles is a hybrid, and when the engine comes on, it's for 10 seconds, and then
Right.
another 2 minutes.
Yep.
The engine actually never gets up to temperature.
Nope.
What do
It's
we
tough.
do in that case?
It's tough. I really wish that the car manufacturers would put something in on a hybrid where you could push a button, and then it would let the internal combustion engine just run for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
To get it warmed up, to off gas the water and stuff. It's really common when we see hybrid samples, especially just coming out of the winter. They all had water in them. I mean, they all had high fuel dilution because of that intermittent run cycle, which is why there are hybrid specific oils, which is a better choice to use in your hybrid engine than just a regular oil, because the regular oils aren't going to deal with the unique complexities of that intermittent run cycle that hybrids present. A hybrid running up in Canada is really, really tough on the oil.
So more frequent oil changes,
Absolutely.
and use a hybrid specific oil.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lake. It's been an honor for me to have you on the show. You've been a source of inspiration for me. I watch a lot of YouTube, and you're one of the only channels that I watch from beginning to end,
Oh,
and
thank you, sir.
never miss one, because there's a lot of information there. I geek out on this stuff. I've had over 80 cars so far in my life, so I tend to go through a lot of different things, and but I've built cars, I've raced cars, I've done all this fun stuff, and it always comes back to proper lubrication. Always,
Yep.
extends the life of your vehicle, makes it more fun, gives you more power, et cetera, et cetera. So excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And if you'd like to learn more about Lake, the link to his website and his social media is down below. There's a lot to learn there. It's a lot of fun. And even if you're not a motor oil geek, watch his stuff. Lake is extremely entertaining. He's fun to watch, dynamic, and you're never going to have a dull moment. Even though he sometimes goes through charts and stuff like that, you'll never have a dull moment with Lake. So thank you very much, Lake. And if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, leave them below. We'll be there to answer, and we'll see you in the next one.